you started shopping for holiday gifts yet? Are you planning parties, or maybe you're just hoping to hide from the festivities? Either way, we have now, as a country, celebrated Thanksgiving, and for many of us, that means we're also turning the corner towards Christmas and all that it entails. I'm Amy Julia Becker, and this is Love is Stronger Than Fear. Today, I'm talking with my friend Tish Harrison Warren, and Tish has just released a short book about the season of Advent. If you don't know Tish's work already, she has 2 other books, Liturgy of the Ordinary and Prayer in the Night. They are also both wonderful. They won, respectively, the Christianity Today Book of the Year Award, which is quite high praise for those books. Tish is also a mom, she's an Anglican priest, and she is someone who unexpectedly found herself writing a regular column for the New York Times about faith and culture. Today, Tish and I get to talk about why she chose to leave the Times, and we also get to talk about this upcoming season of Advent and why waiting to celebrate and practicing a different way of moving through this time matters. I hope you will enjoy this conversation as much as I did. I am very excited and grateful to be sitting here with Tish Harrison Warren. So welcome, Tish. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So we are here to talk about a book that you've written that has to do with Advent, and we'll get to that in a minute. But I'm guessing that there are people who are listening to this podcast who know you most because you, for I don't know how long, you can tell us, have had a newsletter with the New York Times. And I'd love for you to give us a sense of writing the decision to write for the New York Times and just kind of characterize that. Like, what was it like? And then why did you decide to stop the newsletter? I've loved your final essay about that decision. So maybe we can talk about that a little bit as well. But I'm just wondering if you can, kind of explain to listeners who you are vis-a-vis this story about the New York Times
The
and writing for
Times.
them.
Yeah. No one ever in any interview has ever asked me why I came on with the New York Times. I don't think. So this is brand new information for the public. Yeah, it was a total surprise. I mean, they Katie Kingsbury, who's the head of the opinion section, contacted me really out of the blue in July 2021, because I was there for 2 years. So July 2021. And, she asked if we could talk. And I told my husband at the time, like, they probably just want like quotes about faith for a multi-part like piece on faith, or
Sure.
Or this will be a big deal. I thought either this is going to really impact my life, or this is going to be like nothing. And so I had written for the Times twice before, and they were thinking of these newsletters, and I came to mind for her, and she had read. I was doing a monthly column for Christianity Today, and she read a lot of what I wrote and read some of my books, I guess. And so they just asked me if I would talk to them and consider it. And so that started a series of conversations with the Times. And I had they had some things they wanted from me. I had some things I wanted from them. And we sort of talked about it, and it kind of worked out for both of us. They were happy to give me the things I felt like I needed. Like one of the things, for instance, is I just said, I'm happy to do a newsletter on faith, but I'm not the person. If you're wanting kind of comparative religion, like I'm going to write about Hindu holidays, and now I'm going to write about Jewish Sabbath rituals.
Right,
and now
right.
I actually do know a little bit more about Jewish Sabbath rituals, or but whatever. I'm going to kind of observe different kind of movements, or even deconstruction movements or whatever. I just said, like, that's great. That's actually great. And I'm super for that. I would read it. But I'm not the person to do that. I don't have the expertise, but I'm also I'm an Anglican priest and coming out of this very specific tradition. And I, of course, especially with the Times audience, my assumption is going to be that a lot of my readers don't share the tradition, or that I certainly need to use accessible terms,
Right.
but also just not to make presumptions that we're starting always in this seeing the world the same way, but that we can still have a conversation about that, but that in that conversation, I'm going to be coming from a very specific place with specific lenses, and I'm and so basically I just said I'm gonna have to be me, like fully me in that. And they were like, that's great, that's what we want. And then I had some kind of more logistic kind of things that I needed, and they were great about that. And then the things they wanted also seemed great. And so over the course of maybe a month, we talked, and then they hired me, and it went fast. I mean, once I think they hired me, and it was like maybe 2 weeks later, I did my first piece, and then it was every week. Especially that first year, I did 48 pieces in 52 weeks.
Yeah,
so
that's amazing.
It was a lot, and then I stayed on for another year, and so it was a really good experience. I'm still really proud of the Times. Like, I just feel like my experience, and I can't speak for everyone's experience there, but mine was good, and it felt like they never muzzled me in terms of faith. They never said, like, can you be less Christian? In fact, they put me up to some pieces that were really controversial that I don't know if I would have done on my own,
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
But like asking for my perspective, saying, like, we know you bring a different perspective to this. We'd really like to hear it. Would you be willing to do that? So I think they're really seeking to be a place of true, like, old school liberalism, in the sense of we can have many voices at the table and we can talk. That was my experience anyway. So I'm still on great terms with the Times. I hope to write for them again. Leaving may not be, I don't think at this point that it's like I'll never write for the Times ever again.
Right.
It was a combination of it. There's lots of things that go into a decision to step away from something, and especially something like this, which is like, was a huge honor. In many ways, it's the top of my career. Like, there's not going to be another. It's the most read paper in the entire planet. So no one else is going to ask me to write on faith. Can you come write about, God for the most read paper in the world? This is probably, it's not going to happen again. But I think it was a combination of things. One, as I told you before, that writing weekly, just that pace, made it very difficult to do anything else. And in this season of my life, I still have a 3-year-old. And so I have a 13-year-old, 10-year-old, and 3-year-old. So it was alive. And I want to return to books. I had book ideas I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And I just really couldn't, it was difficult for me to write for the Times and a book, partly because of time, but also because of just my brain having to switch between material like that. Like, I'm realizing there's only so many words that I can write in a week. And
the way you structure those words, like, I just remember I was mentioning this to you earlier too, but I blogged for Christianity Today for a while, and everything I wrote there was supposed to be 800 to 1,200 words. And so I started to only be able to write any idea in 800 to 1,200 words.
Yes.
And I needed
totally
to be able to, like, stretch that out again. And I had to walk away in order to work on another book.
That makes complete sense. I totally identify with that.
Yeah.
Because you begin your, so there's some great things, just if we want to just talk shop as writers, I can do this all day long, but there's some great things the Times, I really came into the Times as a writing perfectionist.
Mm.
I was the one who sweated over every
Yeah.
preposition that
Yeah.
I used. I really wanted the words to be like perfect, quote unquote perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And so I, was the person with any kind of piece in like a magazine or in a book, certainly, that like you would have to pry the manuscript like from my fingers. I just
Mm-hmm.
wanted to keep editing and editing and editing until I just wanted and the Times just rids you of any perfectionism because it just has to get out. And so and the whole world notices. There's a Twitter site that's just devoted to catching typos
No
or grammatical
way.
errors in the Times. So anytime I'm not on Twitter anymore, so I didn't see it. I got off 2 years ago when I was working at the Times, but every week it would just be anything that and especially with the weekly rhythm, you just have to get it out, and so it changes the way you write, which in some ways will be really good. But also, what you were saying is it does make you think in kind of smaller
Yeah.
bites, and yeah, and then on top of that, I also just think yeah, it I I only can use that creative space in my brain so much. It just
Right.
feels like it's a button I push, and I don't know. I mean, somewhere between 1,000 to 2,000 words, I hit my limit. And so if 1,500 of those are going to the Times, like it would just be really hard to eke
Mm-hmm.
out a book. Otherwise, and what people don't realize is if you're putting 800 to 1,200 words on the page, that you have to do way more research than 800 to
Right.
1,200 words. Like there's a lot that doesn't get in because you can't write about everything every time. And so even if I could write that in 2 days, I need to spend the rest of the week figuring out what I'm writing about next week. And a lot of times it was things I was researching and learning,
Mm-hmm.
and people I was talking to, or interviews I was doing, things that it takes a lot to get to the 800 to 1,500 words that we would do. And so, um, yeah, so some of it was just sheer time. The other part, though, that I kind of wrote about is I think I began, how
Hmm.
can I say this? Because I loved what I was doing, and I mean, honestly, it's one of the great honors of my life that I got to do that, and I
Yeah.
would love to do something similar again in the future. But I think writing I writing about God is particularly controversial. So I was a lightning rod
Mm.
writing about God, particularly with the belief. I'm trying to be orthodox.
Mm-hmm.
I see orthodoxy more as a goal than a description. So I don't really say that I am orthodox, but that's kind of what I'm hoping.
Mm.
And so particularly because of that with the Times, it's easier to write for the Times or for CT or to any audience who you naturally agree with everything.
Yeah.
Because you don't have to write as well if you share all the same assumptions and priors as your readership.
Yeah.
And so it actually takes a lot more from someone to kind of build a bridge. And this is not to say that all my readers disagreed with me. I actually had lots of letters from people who do, and also just great things like I had a lot of Jewish rabbis that read my stuff and would respond. So we obviously don't agree on everything, but there was a lot of there was enough of kind of overlap that we could talk about something like Sabbath keeping, or
Right.
technology and the role of technology, or what it means to be a person of faith and care about the environment. But some of the ones that particularly pushed I'm progressive enough that I had plenty of progressive pieces, but anything that pushed against the left in any way at the Times
Yeah.
always ended up costing a lot in terms of it's going to be, I mean, I just knew I would let my assistant know, because it would just be a week. It's going to be a bad week. Like,
Right.
it's just going to be a week with a lot of pushback. And we knew that, and we made those choices anyway.
Yeah.
And I would do that again. But I think that had a cost, but specifically what I mean is engaging in, because sure, it had a cost, it wasn't fun, but that's not a reason to leave. Like, honestly, that doesn't, it doesn't bother me. I think that's just part of writing in public. But I think all controversy about God being such a part of your life ends up sometimes making it more difficult to actually know and interact with God. And so I was getting to the point where it felt like, particularly because I think that being on such a national level pulled me out of my local church in some ways. I literally, like, I was still very involved in my local church, but I couldn't, for instance, preach, just because it was too much to write a sermon and write this at the same time.
Yeah.
So it started to be that it felt like what I was writing about with God, and especially what I write about, which is, often really spiritual practices, pretty local, pretty daily, pretty ordinary. I was writing a lot about the local church. I just began to feel like it was becoming all theoretical. Like, it was something in my life that I believe and proclaim, but wasn't practicing and living. And so I wanted, in a way, to rediscover kind of, and I don't actually totally even remember my last piece now, because it's been a while. And that's one of the funny things about writing in 800 to 1500, is people would be like, I left your piece 2 weeks ago. And I would be like, I don't even remember what that was. I'm already working on I'm already working on my next piece. So, but I remember talking about, that sometimes God, the abstraction of God, actually, and debating the abstraction of God, can keep us from engaging in things that actually we encounter God at, like Sunday worship, like dropping off food at a bereaved friend's house, like sitting down with my kids and having a conversation about, faith, or about their day, or about whatever. And I think being the sort of abstraction of God at a national level was keeping me from some of these things that I really wanted to do on a pastoral, local church, local community, even like in my home kind of level.
Right.
And so it felt like I just didn't ever want to get to the point where God was a thing that was part of my brand. That I debated with other people who had God or anti-God as part of their brand.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want to end up on the other side of this having, really, really great things to say in the Times about God, but not really knowing God or my neighbors. And so that was kind of what was behind that.
Well, thank you for sharing that story with us. And I really appreciate and can relate. I think the other thing that comes to mind to me is at least for me, when I am so tethered to the immediate, like I have to produce something now and it's supposed to be relevant to this moment, it also can take me out of the kind of timeless truths aspect of faith, and actually the timeless truths, it doesn't mean they're not tethered to our local experience, but they're not as tethered to like the news cycle, right? Like, so
that's right.
And I'm thinking actually about this book on Advent as I say that, because somehow in the midst of what you were doing at the Times,
that was a good transition.
Well, thank you. I was thinking about it as you were talking. I was like, oh gosh, this is related. But so I don't know how you wrote the Advent book while you were in the midst of that, because you must have, because it's here on my desk. But I am thinking about that sense of like going into a space of timeless truths, like writing about an aspect of the Christian calendar that has been around for centuries, if not longer, and that really is, in fact, meant to kind of draw us out of the, place of the immediate, not just the news cycle, but the Santa Claus and twinkly lights, and so i'm
Mhm.
I'm curious about, well, what do I want to ask you? I guess as we make this transition towards a book about Advent, why don't we start with like, what is Advent? And also like,
Yeah.
how is it different than like our culture's preparation for Christmas?
Right.
Yeah, let's start there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. So Advent is the first season in the Christian calendar. It starts off the Christian calendar, and it is a time of waiting um, uh, that comes before Christmas, which is the next season. So it's a time of waiting and preparation for that. But Advent historically is far less about Christmas and far more about waiting on the eschaton, the return of Jesus, the coming king. And so, and Advent also has a sense of waiting on Christ to come into the brokenness and pain
Hmm.
of our lives. That Jesus didn't just come 2,000 years ago, but Jesus, I mean, we need Jesus to come now into the brokenness into our lives, and we look forward to Jesus setting all things right. So there's really, I began the book talking about the three comings. Advent means coming of Advent. And so, and like brass tacks, very practical, it's begins 4 Sundays before Christmas, and it's those 4 weeks leading up to Christmas that I mean, it depending on what day Christmas falls, it's usually more than just 4 weeks,
Right.
but it's the 4 Sundays before Christmas and the weeks that follow them. So um I wouldn't have written a book on Advent. I mean, this is a really different project than I've done because the other books were the other Liturgy of the Ordinary and Prayer in the Night. I'm not talking about my kids' book here,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
Liturgy of the Ordinary and Prayer in the Night were very much books that were self-generated. They were sort of I mean, I hope they were spirit generated more than
Right.
me, but they were my idea. I mean, it was just sort of my own kind of work. This was a project with 6 other people that Esau McCauley was the series editor for,
Mm-hmm.
and where we each took a season of the church calendar, and you can buy them separate, or you can, I mean, theoretically and hopefully, churches and small groups
Yeah.
can buy them together and read them together, and it would cover a year.
Right.
And so it was more of like, I would have probably never just on my own been like, I'm going to write a book about Advent.
Yeah.
So it was more of assigned to me. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
he actually called and said, do you want Lent or Advent? And I said, I'll take either one, but I think I like Advent more. I mean, it's less depressing than Lent.
Yeah.
And so, although it is still depressing, but less than Lent. And yeah, that's how I sort of came to it. And in terms of how it's different from Christmas, I think this is so interesting because I would say, as I told people that I'm writing, and my husband wrote this with me. That's, by the way, how I did this, and also the Times.
Okay. There you
I
go.
wrote this book, but I did not write it alone. He helped a lot, especially in the research, the historical research of Advent. So when we would talk about writing this book, people almost always brought up Christmas, like the tension of Christmas. I think people feel that a lot with Advent of so the first question was always like almost in a pretty prescriptive way, like, tell me when I could start listening to Christmas music.
Mm-hmm.
Like, tell me when to decorate the tree. Tell me when to pull out the sweaters. Like, it was like very, and which is interesting because I do think in America, especially, Advent is so countercultural. Like, we start Christmas so early
In like
here.
November. I know. It's if
Yeah.
not before, but yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, usually in October
Right.
it's starting now. I mean, if at least in Austin,
Yeah, I'm
and
thinking of
in
like the
October, it's
move.
still like,
I'm thinking of the move from Halloween to Santa Claus. Like, so I'm really thinking of like November
yeah,
1st is when CVS switches it out.
that's true.
Time.
Yeah. So November 1st at a lot of places, there's at the World Market by my house, it's like, it becomes half Halloween and half
Okay.
Christmas around, but which is very funny in Austin because it's like 90
Right.
degrees
It's still hot.
sometimes in October.
Still here, ready for the treat.
um, but so seasons mean nothing here anyway. But I think yeah. So I do think it's interesting because I feel like not in practice. I think in practice most people still just love Christmas and the hope it represents. But in media, and maybe a little in practice, in parts of the church, Christmas has gotten a little bit eaten by the culture wars in the sense of, the Merry Christmas versus Happy
Yeah.
Holidays, and you need to say Merry Christmas and not Happy Holidays. And it's such a dumb, I mean, it just could not be a more useless and stupid thing to talk about. But but what's funny, so the countercultural nature of Christmas has been marked by whether or not you say Christmas or holidays,
Right.
I guess. Just again, holidays is from the word holy days.
Right.
So it's a really dumb
Right.
debate. But um uh and uh but I actually think Advent is far more, I think that is not, here's what I'm saying. That kind of debate on, conservatives against the culture with Christmas is not actually countercultural.
Mm-hmm.
It's just grumpy for no reason. It's just kind of trying to be transgressive without actually it costing you anything in your life. But Advent is actually in itself pretty transgressive. The notion that before we celebrate, we stop to grieve. Before we remember Christ coming, we remember the darkness in the world, why
Mm-hmm.
we need Christ to come. Not just that we theoretically need Christ to come, but what actual things in our actual world
Mm.
can we not solve on our own? You know,
Yeah.
we're pretty kind of, we're pretty self-sufficient on our own. I think Dorothy Day, I could be misquoting Day, but I think it was Day that said, like, live in such a way that your life doesn't make sense if Jesus isn't risen from the
Right.
dead.
Right.
Right. And I think for most of us, even most Christians, live, um, we seek pretty good, normal American lives
Right.
where we don't really rely on God, but we need Him to show up, you know, when things get bad, as they do in all of our lives, when we face death or pain. Or it's kind of sprinkled on our life as an identity maker. That's why these people, fight about Christmas, is that's part of this is part of their identity, is they're the ones kind of standing up for Christ for Christmas. But in actuality, we need to encounter and look at and face the places of our life that are really unsolvable unless God intervenes, which is what Christmas is all about. Like, there was no solution until God surprised the world with a solution. And so I think Advent makes space to get to the place where we say, yeah, we are desperate. We are desperate without you, which is a very different posture than early December. Sorry, in most of, at least in the retail space in early December.
Totally. Yeah, I'm thinking about, for a
So,
long time, I like very much lived in that tension of what I called, well, eventually started calling Christian Christmas and American Christmas, and with Advent being a part of Christian Christmas. And I do still feel like I kind of toggle back and forth between the two, because of trying
yeah,
to figure out how not to be just like a grumpy person
right.
in December, and yet how also to recognize that there's a purpose in the waiting and in the sense of like longing. And as you've been talking about darkness, and I'm thinking about, there are two places in the book that are could seem contradictory, although they're actually in some ways talking about the same thing. One is about the idea of emptiness being filled at Christmas. So like this is a quote: empty skies are suddenly full of angels. Empty mangers are filled with the light of the world. And the significance of like allowing that emptiness to be present in our own experience in some
Yeah.
ways, like as we lead
Yeah.
into Christmas. But then you also, I loved this image. You wrote about Advent as a time of being pregnant with the things of God.
Mhm.
So that
Yeah.
sense of like, we're waiting, but there's something that is like growing and
Yep.
filling us up in that waiting time. And I don't know, I just really loved that, both of those, the idea of like an emptiness that gets filled, but also of pregnancy, where it's like at first small and hidden, but over time becomes this new life that is really growing, and eventually is born. So um, how to do that without being grumpy and obnoxious in the midst of our culture, I'm not sure. Um,
Yeah.
and I am curious whether you have any like particular practices that
Mhm.
you would like kind of recommend for, people who are going into the season and want to have some
I think
recognition of that.
I think, yeah. Well, first of all, I think the attempt is part of the practice of naming exactly what you're saying. I mean, I talk in the book about that Advent is in some ways is like training wheels for all of Christian discipleship, in the sense that it is countercultural, but in a very mellow kind of way. Like,
Mm,
I mean, what I mean is like, I think Advent's a very good thing to practice, but it's far easier than, say, selling all your possessions and giving them to the needy, right?
right, right.
Like, like Jesus said to the rich young ruler, right? Um, so it, but it is this like tiny countercultural thing, which Christians. So it reminds us that Christians are countercultural. That the distinction you make between American Christmas and Christian Christmas is so great, because it reminds us that there is they're not the same, right? That
Mm,
there is a distinction between being an American citizen and a citizen of the kingdom of heaven, in lots and lots of ways, in the ways we use our money, the ways we use our time, the way we talk about politics, the way we use our bodies, the way we think about marriage, the way we think about our neighbors. There should be a distinction, or our work, or you could go on and on, the environment, that I think there's a distinction between America
yeah,
and Christianity,
yeah.
and the American right and Christianity and the American left and
Hmm.
Christianity, like that we should constantly sort of be making these distinctions. So it reminds us of that. But then the question is, how do we enter into that as a alien, as a stranger, as
Yeah.
a visitor, as the scriptures would say, and not and be joyful in the midst of that, right? Not be grumpy in the midst of that, but be people of joy,
Mm,
um that might feel exile in some ways as Christians, but that are are singing, right? That are worshiping, that are living our lives with joy, because heaven and earth are full of God's glory, all of it,
mm,
right?
yeah.
Including America.
Hmm.
So I think that like in Advent is like the baby food of all of those concepts, and that it's a way to try to practice being countercultural with full of joy,
Mm,
in a way that is just, it's just sort of training wheels. It just kind of gets us used to the much bigger ways that we will be asked to be countercultural people that are still people of joy, and not people of like aggression, hatefulness to our neighbor, resentment, that don't
yeah,
engage in
yeah.
practices of resentment, to our neighbor. So that's like the general thing, is I think actually striving living in the tension that you're describing with joy and faithfulness is the tension of our whole life. And
Mm,
so I think Advent's really great in a way to practice that as a community, and even talk through that as a community. Some really basic practices.
yeah.
I mean, one of them that I bring up in the book is fasting, prayer, and giving. I just feel like the way the church has always, from the beginning of Advent, practiced Advent is fasting, prayer, and giving.
Mm,
So that might and you think in some ways that's very hard to do during Christmas because it's a time of indulgence and
Right.
or not during Christmas because that, but I mean during the
During
American
December, like,
Christmas,
yeah, the lead
December,
up.
yeah, American that but I also think you can take that can look really different. So you can even take maybe one day a week and fast,
Mhm.
or you can fast from certain things like social media or and taking up those practices are a way that nobody even has to know you're doing it, right?
Yeah.
Like in fact, Jesus says to often keep that to yourself, so you can still take those up joyfully. And then if you have a Christmas party for your office on Friday night, like
Right.
maybe that's not the day to do it.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
fast the rest of the week, and then you'll really, really enjoy that food at the Christmas party.
Yeah.
But also giving. I mean, you just this is a thing that our culture sort of does kind of get, like partly because the tax cycle, people give more
Hmm.
generously at the end of the year, but it is a time because we are giving gifts to other people that instead of just focusing on material things, to actually try to give sacrificially,
Mhm.
um to to try to loose the chains of injustice and care for the poor, as the scriptures always call, like that is what a true fast is. So fasting, especially the prophets always remind us, fasting is not enough in it itself. The idea is when we deprive ourselves of things that are good, like food or entertainment, or
Mhm.
the things we spend our life on that are not bad things, but we remember and are in solidarity with folks that do not have those things as readily. And so if you just take up those practices, those are some pretty powerful ways to be countercultural. There's smaller things, right? Um for instance, I don't even put this in the book because I don't want this to be something that people think, oh, this is the way I have to do Advent. But
Mm.
our family, and maybe I should have put this in the book, I don't know. But our family um buys a Christmas tree because we've realized if you wait until
Right.
Christmas Day, there are no Christmas
Yeah.
trees left and they are sad. But we buy them. We tend to put lights. We put lights on them to, and then, which may or may not be Advent, but
You're right.
Advent's a time of darkness. We
Yep.
put lights, but we don't decorate the tree.
Mm.
So all of the ornaments, which like every family have ornaments we've used every year and that are
Right.
special to us, all of that we do together on Christmas Eve.
Hmm.
And then we leave it up, the tree, all 12 days of Christmas.
Right.
I mean, I would also say, like, please, if you're experimenting with Advent,
Right.
so if you're holding off on some of the Christmas celebration, which it does take, I mean, we hold off on the Christmas celebrations. We start preparing, so kind of closer to Christmas, you'll start seeing more around our house, but we do it slowly. So we don't have all of the Christmas stuff until Christmas Eve. But if you do that, please really celebrate for the full 12 days of
Right.
Christmas, because otherwise you just feel kind of like, I grieved, I mourned, I fasted, I waited, I prayed, and then it was over in one day, which is just the saddest, right? And so the intensity of our celebration needs to match the intensity of our preparation. And so what I'm not saying is we have too much celebration in America. We really need to be very dour and
Right.
focus on grief. I think that for my family, and this is absolutely true, the practice of Advent has made us where when we get to Christmas, we're really eager to celebrate, and we celebrate for all 12 days. And it doesn't, it, we don't feel we don't feel glutted in the way that I think, I never celebrated Advent growing up.
Hmm.
And by the time you get kind of to around
Hmm.
like December 30th, you're just done. You're so over sugared, over celebrated, and you hadn't taken, and sometimes at the worst, especially in hard years or times when you're really grieving hard things. This is, I think, partly why we get kind of the holiday blues. That's like a real psychological thing, right? That is even recognized clinically, that there's more suicides over the holidays. That's bigger than holiday blues. That's depression, but depression increases over the holidays. But even non-drastic kind of things, like just people struggle more over holidays. And I think that's partly because people are feeling pushed into merriment when they haven't really been given space and time to be really honest about the ways they're not merry, and that they are grieving, and that the world is really broken, and that their lives are broken, right? So I feel like even just making space for that has allowed us to be really intentional about, we've named the darkness, and now we're going to really name hope, and we're going to name light, and we're going to name the glory of Emmanuel, of God with us, coming to be, that God is actually with us because Jesus came. Jesus does still come into our lives, and Jesus is coming. But that there's some that actually being kind of holding off on some of that celebration in quote unquote American Christmas has allowed us to enter the actual Christian season of Christmas much more joyfully, and like with, we're happy to see it go almost 2 weeks,
Right.
12 days, and then you get Epiphany, which is, so you have 13 days of celebration. And so I'm all for making that really, and make Christmas equal in celebration to your holding off in Advent.
Thank you so much for all of that. And I thought, as we come to the end of talking about Advent, I wanted to just read this. It's a quotation from the conclusion of the book, but I don't think I'm giving too much away to read it.
Spoiler alert. That's all right. It's thousands of years old,
exactly.
This practice. So.
We can't tell too much, but I think this just relates to what you've been saying, and I just appreciated these words so much. So Advent is training in hope, because this season tells us that when things lie fallow, they do not lie in waste. Things that seem dormant are not dead, and times of waiting are not without meaning, purpose, or design. God is working, sometimes almost imperceptibly, deep beneath the surface of time. Waiting is part of his redemption. It is part of his gift to us. It is part of his grace. And I think even of your point that people feel more depressed sometimes during the holidays. And I wonder whether our refusal to acknowledge the darkness and to even have this posture of waiting and saying, I'm going to hold on to hope that the things that are dormant are not dead, whether that even contributes to that sense of loneliness or despair, and whether Advent might, even though it seems almost counterintuitive, might be the proper way to walk from darkness to light, from despair to joy, which really is given to us in the actual season of Christmas. So anyway, those are just some of the thoughts that prompted for me. And I'm just really grateful for you taking the time to give us a bit of an overview. People obviously should get this book, and it's short. You will have time, even if you only read a little bit over the course of this Advent season, but it's got a lot of really beautiful wisdom within it. So thank you, Tish, for that.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, as always, for listening to this episode of Love is Stronger Than Fear. Please do check out the show notes if you want more information about Tish and all the things we talked about here in this episode. I now would like to offer a shameless sales plug for myself and for Tish, because you might be thinking about gifts to give during this holiday season. And I've got some ideas for you. Books are fantastic, inexpensive, thoughtful, long-lasting gifts. And guess what? There are lots of them out there, some of them written by me, and then also these other ones, in all seriousness, written by Tish, which would be really great gifts. They are timeless gems. I hope the same is true of my books. And so, if you are looking for just the right gift for the reflective spiritual people on your list, I would love to point you towards Liturgy of the Ordinary, Prayers in the Night. You could also look at To Be Made Well or any of my other books. So, go buy books. We are big fans of that around here. I also wanted to let you know that in keeping with my own need for seasons in which I slow down a little bit, I'm going to take a break from the podcast for a bit. I will be back in February with a series of new episodes, which means actually that I get to read some awesome books over the next couple of months and interview some wonderful writers about those books. But my point in telling you this is don't expect another episode for a little while. And if you're not already a subscriber, please do go and subscribe now so that when I return in February, it will pop up in your podcast feed. As I do come to the conclusion, finally, of this episode, I want to thank Jake Hansen for editing the podcast and thank Amber Beery, my social media coordinator, for making everything happen. And I want to thank you for being here and for listening and for the beautiful words of feedback that you often offer to me. Finally, as you go into your day today, I hope you will carry with you the peace that comes from believing that love is stronger than fear.